people in communities have their, their favorite store that they go to and kind of hang out and they talk to the owners, and maybe their friends also gather there. There might also be like vacant lots that people are kind of using to kind of hang out in. I think part of the ways in which we can kind of retrofit our communities to be more of a 15-minute city is to, first of all, identify and document kind of where are those natural social gathering places in our communities, and also where are there barriers to actually being able to gather.
I am Bob C., and I cover transportation for WGBH News, and I will be your host this morning. Well, our guests today include Tracy Corley, the originator of this series. She is Mass Inc.'s Transit-Oriented Development Fellow, who has organized our Transit-Oriented Development series here with the Forum Network. Joining us this morning, Francisco Ramos is community organizer with New View Communities, a nonprofit dedicated to creating strong, healthy neighborhoods. Aimé Gauthier is the Chief Knowledge Officer at the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy, better known as ITDP, where she manages leadership and innovation programs and global research and initiatives. Denise Delgado is a writer, artist, and cultural organizer, and she is also the executive director of Eggleston Square Main Street, an organization focused on strengthening Eggleston's business district and revitalizing surrounding public spaces. And Tom Skarowski, Executive Director of Planning and Community Development for the city of Fitchburg, one of Massachusetts' gateway cities. Welcome to you all this morning. Now, we will have some polling questions throughout the presentation we'd like those of you attending to respond to. So let's begin with the first of those polling questions right now. We'd like to know which of the following amenities are within a 15-minute walk of your home. Give us a sense of where you live and where those amenities might be, and that will be very helpful as we go forward here. Now, what we'd like to do is begin with Tracy, who will give us a presentation on what do we mean when we talk about a 15-minute city. Tracy.
Thank you, Bob. I'm excited to be here this morning and to be talking about this really great topic with a great set of guests today. But if we could look at the first slide, I have a couple of slides to show you today. I want to just kind of give a big overview as to kind of what a 15-minute city is and what's happening here in Massachusetts. To start out the conversation by sharing this interesting Twitter post someone put up about somewhere right now, somewhere near you right now, a human is walking indoors on a treadmill for like 45 minutes before they drive a mile to buy a coffee. And so, why are people wasting time at the gym when they could be walking to get their next cup of coffee? Well, for those of us who live in 15-minute cities, we can. But what is a 15-minute city? On the next slide, a 15-minute city is a city where everyone lives in a 15-minute neighborhood. I know that sounds a little bit redundant, but a 15-minute neighborhood is one where basic needs, employment, childcare, education, civic participation, and recreation are all available within a leisurely 15-minute walk or bike ride. And that means no spandex or special gears needed to get around. And that means 15 minutes for everybody, whether you're a caregiver, a child, seniors, those with mobility challenges. 15 minutes means different things for different people. Whether you're carrying packages or caring for small children on your walk, everything you need should be nearby. In 15-minute cities, access is equitable. That means that monetary exchange or productive activity is not required. You can just hang out or be with your friends, and that's all perfectly okay. And so I think that our gateway cities already have the infrastructure to quickly become 15-minute cities. In fact, let's look at Fitchburg, which of course we'll hear a lot more about today. We examined some data from a study on the association between walking speed and age and healthy free-living individuals, and found that the average mid-aged adult, that's between about 20 and 50, can cover roughly 3/4 of a mile in 15 minutes. That drops by 1/10 of a mile leading up to age 70. And for women, that drop actually starts in their late 20s, which could be due to a variety of factors. Now here we show Fitchburg, where the average household in or near the downtown commuter rail station is within 0.4 miles to the nearest grocery store. On this map, the red circles around each grocery store is 0.4 miles and the green circle is 0.3 miles. With stores so close, you'd think that everyone was walking to get groceries, right? Well, not necessarily. We'll hear a little bit more about this from the Fitchburg team and other guests in a moment. In communities everywhere, it just seems that we're doing a very poor job of sharing our streets with those not using cars, which is the reason why we want to talk about streets today. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why people aren't able to walk 15 minutes in their communities. We place fences, trees, waste bins, and utility poles in the space dedicated for walking, then let those spaces fall into disrepair. We also let people park on pedestrian paths, or as you can see in the background, allow folks to plant their gardens there. We redirect pedestrians into bikeways when we want to improve or build new things. We also let leaves clog stormwater systems, creating dangerous crossings. Or we let plows in the winter clear car lanes, piling snow into crosswalks and onto sidewalks. As a matter of fact, I spend much of my time walking in the street whenever the winter hits. So although a lot of factors go into making a 15-minute city, the streets are the best place to start. And why is that? Well, that's because streets are critical to urban infrastructure. They comprise 80% of all the public space in most cities. With such a large share of public space taken up by streets, we have to make them more usable by people from all walks of life. And that means that 15-minute cities maximize accessibility and mobility for inhabitants and visitors of all ages and abilities, and not just vehicle drivers. Streets must be comfortable and safe and convenient and accessible by all. And the pandemic has made this more urgent than ever. Because of the pandemic, we're walking and biking a bit more. And as this map here shows, this is true across most of Massachusetts. Though most gateway cities haven't quite stepped up the activity as we see in more suburban and some rural communities. But if we take a look at vehicle miles traveled, although congestion on commuter routes into and out of Boston has dropped significantly since the start of the pandemic, local communities are reporting that a lot of people are just driving short distances to access basic needs. Those communities without grocery stores, public spaces, pharmacies, healthcare services, and essential jobs close to home are still hitting the road and are doing so at a level that's almost back to normal, I guess you can say, in some of those local communities. So although the evidence is showing that transit and cities can be quite safe during the pandemic, and we'll drop a link to an article that we wrote about this, the CDC is promoting that people purchase personal vehicles for travel. This advice might help short-term car sales, but it won't help stop the reckless behavior or stifle improvements, and it will stifle improvements in air quality, transportation choices, and streets and other urban infrastructure that make 15-minute cities vital to our recovery. So on our last slide, we've seen increased support for improving distancing and access to streets. But as with all the programs that are out there, what we're seeing is that these are bringing up some critical questions, in particular for whom and by whom. And we'll hear a little bit more about that in a second. But as we think about all the shared streets programs, open streets programs, other pilots, for whom and by whom are these designed? In a previous TOD talk, we actually probed the dangers of the dangers that people of color, especially Black people, face when in public places. Reports of police shootings and racial motivated murders like Ahmaud Arbery prove that over and over again. But in some communities, we see some implicit privilege in the neighborhoods chosen, focusing on communities that already have better infrastructure, activities, public space, and services. These programs can impose values on residents without consideration for more pressing needs. I think about the problems in Flint, Michigan. With the provision of necessary infrastructure, it's always been unequal across racial and social classes. And when communities redirect planning budgets for tactical pilots, they signal a lack of commitment to human interest outcomes, which take time to manifest. Don't get me wrong, we need both. Just some neighborhoods need community-centered planning and improvements to water and sewer, electricity, and broadband internet services more than a bike share program. And these are just some of the things we aim to address in today's conversation. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Bob.
Well, thank you very much, Tracy. And now we're going to begin with Francisco Ramos of New View. Francisco, I know that you have said that one of the big obstacles to building a 15-minute city is basic human needs. What do you mean by that?
if we have 15-minute cities, we need to have, the basic elements that residents in a community need in order to survive. We have issues like access to food, fresh vegetables and fruits. We have clinics. We have schools, and residents need to have access to those basic services. In Fitchburg, we have, for instance, neighborhoods, communities where it's not easy. We have sections of the city where, we have food deserts. There are no food stores, and people need to walk. And it might be that, they are within a reasonable distance, but if the streets are not friendly, that distance is not as short as it seems, right? It's not difficult in Fitchburg to see, residents pulling carts with groceries in the streets, and when the winter comes, they need to pull them through snow and ice, and so community development needs to take that into consideration when designing these 15-minute cities. We see also children that walk the streets on sidewalks that that become slippery in the winter, and Fitchburg being one of the hilliest cities in the country, that also talks about safety and security. And if the leaves are not cleaned up in the fall, and the snow falls on the leaves, then it becomes a serious situation. So all of that needs to be taken into consideration when we talk about 15-minute cities.
Now, Tom Skorowski, you've been working in Fitchburg specifically. You talk about the challenge that Fitchburg faces in creating a cultural shift. What do you mean by that?
Well, thinking about 15-minute cities, and if the key point of that is, everything's within a 15-minute walking distance, what we've developed over the past half century in Fitchburg and in many other gateway cities is almost like a 15-hour city. And I mean that quite literally. If you were to pick up your phone and get on Google Maps right now to check and see how far it would take you to walk from Fitchburg to downtown Boston, where many of our residents commute, it's literally 15 hours. So we have created, both in our policies and programs and our infrastructure investments, a structure that works really well for a commuter that's going into Boston or driving into Worcester for work, but not necessarily for a resident looking for that 15-minute radius of walkability and bikeability. And I think that has really made its way into the psyche, not just of Fitchburgers, right, but of everyone throughout the country, with this idea of, the automobile being, getting in your car and having that freedom to travel wherever you'd like. That's the American dream, right? And I think we're starting to see now a shift and an understanding of the importance of walkability and bikeability. But, as Tracy indicated and Francisco was getting at, it's still very as much a luxury good to have walkability and bikeability. And we haven't invested in our infrastructure for half a century. And over the last decade, our Chapter 90 funding, which goes towards our roads, it's been relatively level funded as cost to build those roads and build the complete streets infrastructure around them has increased. So, I think dealing with some of those base level community needs and then really changing the psyche and changing our cultural norms to value walkability and value bikeability is really a key component of what we're doing. So, we're trying to start to develop that infrastructure, and we have some really exciting programs and infrastructure investments we're working with the state on, but at the same time, it's really critical and has been and will continue to be to develop a public-private partnership in our downtown neighborhood with folks like Francisco Ramos and New View Communities to build that bottom-up support to change the cultural values and the mindsets to gear them towards walkability and bikeability.
Well, thank you, Tom. We do have the results of our first poll question this morning, asking people what the proximity of their schools and grocery stores are. Which of the following amenities are within a 15-minute walk of your home? 65% of you say schools, 35% doctor's office, 20% office, 85% parks and recreation, 58% grocery stores, 70% open restaurants, 68% public transit, and 60% to place of worship. So that's pretty a good result, I think, that people do have the kind of access to the community essentials we're talking about. However, there are many people who probably still do not. I want to turn now to Ame, who I think has a more of a broader view of what 15 minutes may mean, depending on who we're talking about. Ame?
Yes, thanks. I mean, all of the panelists have been saying this, but it really depends on who you are and where you live. And I just wanted to briefly comment on the 85% access to parks and open space. That's pretty incredible. And I think this gets to the 15 minutes for whom. What we see is there's a lot of inequity about who has access, and I think Francisco is referencing this, who has access to those basic needs. And so open space and green space is one of the most inexplicably distributed, I don't want to call it amenity, because I think it's critical for life. So it's not like yay, we have it. It's a necessity. But a lot of low-income neighborhoods don't have that access. So I thought that was really interesting. But when we talk about 15 minutes for whom, I think it's partly also, it's a time-bound thing. So getting back to what Tracy was saying, it really depends on the speed with which you're walking, and that really depends on who you're walking with. Are you walking with babies and toddlers? A family that will go much slower? Are you, what's your ability level? Are you in a wheelchair? Do you have walking assist? And then the other thing about this picture that I like is that it also shows it's not just the sidewalks that you have to worry about with the walking environment, it's also the crossing environment. And so this actually puts the crossing environment level for the pedestrian and makes the car have to jump in and out of that space, which I think is a really good signal. I think the other thing is it's not just the sidewalks, it's also the destination. So the next slide shows two examples. One is in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, where there's lots of things to walk to, but the walking environment is not super great. And then the other one is Houston, Texas, which is not great on any front, but it really depends on both the conditions within what you're walking. And again, both Tracy and Francisco alluded to this, like if it's not clean, if it's not safe, if you have to jump puddles, that's a big problem. I think this idea of the basic needs is really important because a lot of communities that we work in, they don't have basic infrastructure, which is even starting with the street grid, and I think that's true in U.S. cities too. If you look at different street grids and you think about walkability, smaller blocks, a density of waiting for pedestrians is really important. But you might not have the street grid in place, and then you also might not have things like water, sewage, stormwater management, which is a huge thing. All of these things contribute to just setting the foundation for a 15-minute neighborhood, which is really important. But it is this marriage of land use and mobility that creates access, so just to keep that in mind. In Pune, and this goes a little bit to what Tom was saying, they made it a priority to fund sustainable transportation options. So they put it into their budget that they were going to use 50% of their transportation budget or more to fund walking and cycling and bus. And so this is what you get when you make that a budgetary priority. And also just to point out, the walking environment includes things like shade, seating, activated frontages, so there's activity on the street. So all of those things are important. And then one final note on the cycling environment is cycling can increase your access 3 to 6 times. So in a lot of places you don't have the basic necessities, but if you can expand cycling, it's a kind of a quick way to expand access. But the best way to do that is through protected bike lanes. Just painting bike lanes on there or sharing space is not enough to make cyclists feel safe. And then just to reiterate what Tracy said, I think who feels safe, it's who feels safe in public spaces is really important. It's not just how you allocate that space, it's how people feel like they can use that space. So that's it.
That's great. Thank you, Ame, for giving us that international viewpoint. That's great. Before we get to our final panelist, let's go to our second poll question, which is another one about what kind of access you have to basic services within a 15-minute walk or bike ride of where you live. As you can see the poll question right now, if you would respond, that'd be great. On a typical day, how far do you travel for work, recreation, shopping, or other activities? The second part of that question. Our final panelist is Denise Delgado from Eggleston Square. The Eggleston Square Main Street organization supports the commercial districts and small businesses lingering between Jamaica Plain and Roxbury. And she'd like to focus on housing and open space. So Denise?
So Eggleston Square is, as you noted, it's located between Jamaica Plain, on the border of Jamaica Plain and Roxbury in Boston. And I actually live very, I live in the neighborhood. So I live like 5 minutes from where my office is, and right, in the district. And so it's interesting because during the pandemic, for the last few weeks, I've been without a car. And so, it's an extremely walkable neighborhood. So I live right around the corner from where this park is. And this neighborhood, despite being super, has many of the qualities of a 15-minute neighborhood, I've been able to be here carless with a small child, working, school, everything for the past couple of weeks, and actually been okay and been able to get everything that I need. But it's one of the big challenges of this district is it's considered, a lot of people consider it a drive-through destination, like not a destination, a drive-through neighborhood. It's along the JP Rocks corridor, Washington Street and Columbus Avenue. So there's a bus that goes through here. There used to be the elevated orange line went through here. So this image that we're seeing right here, this is a schematic for a project that we're about to launch next week. It's a placekeeping and economic recovery temporary outdoor dining area in the Eggleston Square Peace Garden. So this parcel of land is actually owned by Clear Channel Outdoor, which is the owner of this billboard. And that billboard is like a remnant of when the T used to pass through this neighborhood. And so I think it's just an interesting spot to look at in terms of that intersection between like infrastructure and transit and these ideas of like walkability and who is this for? Because this parcel presents so many challenges because it's privately owned, because there's a billboard there. The neighborhood is not really oriented to that, there's no longer a T there. It's a piece of land that has been sort of activated and maintained as a park by the community, just sort of out of desperation for many, many years. So we actually have Community Preservation Act funding to do some renovations to really bring the kind of design that it needs. But temporarily now, especially because of COVID, we're facing a lot of the challenges that a lot of business districts are facing right now. There's, shelters for folks who are homeless of reduced capacity. Services are operating at reduced capacity. There are not, speaking of like on that list of what's within a 15-minute walk from you, there's no public bathroom. Public libraries are closed. Places that folks who don't necessarily, have a place to be or a private place to be. The closest bathroom and shower to this neighborhood is like, I don't know, a 20-minute ride. It's not a walkable distance away. So that's created in these public spaces that are not necessarily well stewarded by their owners. It has created a lot of issues for the neighborhood, for the businesses, for the people themselves. And so, you know, this idea of, you know, who are public spaces for, who feels safe. You know, on one hand, there's, you know, a pretty big increase of folks who are homeless and dealing with addiction, spending time in public spaces. And so, you know, we're really trying to think how to address that in a way that acknowledges like what the root cause is, but at the same time, it's also having a big impact on residents and on small businesses. And I'm trying to be aware of time, but you used the word lingering. And they, you know, the businesses were already really struggling prior to the pandemic. So I would really use the word persisting or surviving, because this is a really challenging time. So the purpose of this project was to kind of create a space that is socially inclusive. You know, nobody's going to be kicked out, but that's changing the use from a place where there's, you know, folks, there's negative activity happening that is having an impact on the businesses, to a place that is where, you know, anyone can spend time, people can go to a takeout spot nearby, really take advantage of the neighborhood as a destination. So, you know, we're partnering with a business that's about to open called La Parada Dominican Kitchen. People can order food online and have it run out to them at the park. There will be picnic tables. You know, it's designed to be a place that small businesses can use to kind of bring new customers, get more folks coming into the neighborhood and taking advantage of the great asset that we have in terms of being right in the middle of public transit and lots of other stuff. So this is wayfinding signage that's going to be at the entrance to the location. So with COVID, you know, like just sort of trying to think of new ways to bring people out. A lot of people are more concerned about being in indoor spaces. So we're creating an outdoor barbershop and beauty salon that people can come and get their hair cut outdoors. And that can also be something that helps some of the local salons and businesses. So we're really forced to think in more creative ways about public space. Parking is a huge issue too. I mean, I don't want to talk for too long, but with, you know, with the pandemic, I don't really see a huge increase in people using wanting to use public transportation. More people are using their cars. The small businesses see parking as one of the main challenges in our district. They always want more parking. Affordable housing is a huge part of that. We're a neighborhood where a lot of the businesses that are here serve a customer base that can no longer afford to live here. That's a lot of folks who have kids, who don't have jobs that are completely flexible, where they have complete ownership of their time. You know, they need to get around in a car. So there's just so many layers of this.
Thank you, Denise. I don't know if we have the results of the second poll question ready or not, but if we do, if we could put those up. 61% of you said that the streets near your home do allow you to access basic services within a 15-minute walk or bike ride. That's 61%. 24% said no, and 15% say only in good weather. And on a typical day, how far do you travel for work, recreation, shopping, or other activities? 41% say less than 15 minutes, 50%, 15 to 30 minutes, 20%, 30 minutes to an hour, 0% an hour or more. Okay, thank you for that. You know, when we talk about things like food deserts and the lack of a grocery store in a certain neighborhood, it's one thing to have people have to walk or travel more than 15 minutes to get to the grocery store or other community resource. What can be done to bring those resources into the community so that people don't have to travel as far? What's happening on that front? Francisco or Tom, what about in Fitchburg?
Yeah, so, as Francisco indicated before, we don't necessarily have food deserts in downtown Fitchburg as the crow flies, if a statistician was just to look at it on a map. But because of the infrastructural issues, there are some key impediments. And we've got some really big infrastructure investments that we're making as a city and in partnership with MassDOT and the state to remediate some of those issues. So, we have a bridge that connects our downtown neighborhood, which is our most economically disadvantaged neighborhood in the city and really throughout north central Massachusetts, with our grocery store. It's a $23.5 million investment that we're going to be working with MassDOT over the next 4 to 5 years on. But that investment, that takes time. And again, to go from a 15-hour city to a 15-minute city doesn't happen overnight. And so one of the things we're doing, and this might be a good cue for the Mill Street slide, similar to La Isla in Eggleston Square, we are working on a project called the Mill Street Initiative. And so, we've got over $50 million of infrastructure investment happening in the city, but that's all going to take time. And we wanted to find something that was smaller scale, that was more tactical urbanism, placemaking that we could implement on the ground immediately. Because our ultimate goal as a city is to transform our downtown into North Central's regional hub for arts and culture. And actually, if anyone has read Commonwealth Magazine this week, Michael Jonas, the executive editor, just wrote a great article about how Fitchburg is sort of slowly and incrementally working towards that goal. But the Mill Street Initiative is really our short-term tactical way to make that happen. And what we did essentially is took an old unused alleyway. I think it's been decommissioned since 1944, and has had varying states of activity over the past half century. And we thought about what were some quick tactical ways we could enliven that space and create a place where people wanted to linger. So we worked with Mass Development and their Commonwealth Places program, along with Reimagine North and Main, our public-private partnership that includes New View Communities, the City of Fitchburg, the Fitchburg Arts Museum, Fitchburg State University, our local Chamber of Commerce, our local nonprofit groups and business groups in the city. And we worked to transform that alleyway into a public space, creating decks that could serve, for smaller scale events like music festivals. We had a breakdancing festival there. And we also actually used the arts to enliven the space to sort of be the manifestation of the arts and culture district we're aiming to be. And, it kind of felt like a risky thing for us at the time because we put out an RFP with the goal of getting 35 murals throughout the Mill Street area. And we were a little bit worried in the response that we would get. And in particular, we wanted to encourage local artists to take part in the effort. And if you want to go to the next slide, we can see, some of the murals that were a result of this work. It was pretty phenomenal and transformative. I think of the 35 murals that we had, over 80% of them were local artists. And I think it was a nice proof of concept for us that we do have an arts and culture district locally. And, I think our understanding that all these big, exciting things that we're doing, they're going to take time, but this is really the short-term manifestation of the transformation we're hoping to achieve. And, it's really helped us pivot in the age of COVID. Right where you see the musicians playing there, I was sitting with my lunch there yesterday. And, it creates a nice outdoor active space for people to gather and to create that downtown vitality. So when the bigger infrastructure projects happen, we'll have, the small scale kind of bottom up cultural shift to help support it. And, certainly we've got in the works an artist live work development through New View Communities right across the street from our art museum. We've got Fitchburg State University investing over $40 million in transforming a vacant theater into a video game design lab and a 1,300-seat theater that will really serve as that regional hub for arts and culture. And then, a number of smaller scale investments in addition to our city hall, a $23.5 million rebuild that, we're actually right now in a former GE factory. And I think it's indicative of the challenges we faced over time in the deindustrialization and the lack of investment in our downtown. But we're slowly making that shift, and I think Mill Street's a great way to call that out.
That's great. You have a great art museum there as well, and there's lots of examples of former industrial sites being transformed into art venues that I think are very hopeful, and it also, I think, changes everyone's else perception of Fitchburg in the outside world and what is available there. I would like to ask Ame a question about something that she had talked about in a previous discussion about when we talk about trying to bring resources into the community. She talked about pop-ups and informal vendors. Ame, could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've tried to do is recognize that street vendors and informal vending often are in places that lack other options. So you should protect them, and they're vital pieces of that. So if you don't have a grocery store, maybe you can bring in a street vendor that can help. If you don't have restaurants, maybe you can bring in a taco truck. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to think about this. But you can bring in the services there. We've also seen mobile health clinics come in to communities to help. We've also seen co-location, and I just wanted to throw this out there. Co-location in, like, if you're a public space, which I'm going to call government and transit as public spaces, you can co-locate services there. So you might be able to locate pop-up grocery stores near places of high density demand, like transit. The other thing is, we saw this in Fortaleza in Brazil. They were having trouble getting pharmacies and clinics to be fully stocked and well supplied throughout the communities. So instead, they decided to centralize the pharmacy and clinic in a terminal for the bus transit so that they would try to be able to access as many people as possible, because they just didn't have the resources to get everyone in the community. So that's another way to think about it, is how can you centralize key basic services that help expand reach.
Yeah, and let me build on that a little bit, Bob. And I was actually with Ame in Brazil for an event in Fortaleza, and we also went to Rio de Janeiro. And I remember riding the transit, and we wound up riding transit for, it was all day. It was probably about 10 hours, because the average commute one way in Rio de Janeiro is 2.5 hours. And you get onto some of the commuter rails, and there are no services. And so there are a lot of informal vendors going up and down the aisles selling food and snacks and things, because people are spending half of their day commuting. And I heard someone complaining about that. I'm like, but it's a necessary service, because if you're going to be in transit, or you're going to be getting from point to point that long, and the system isn't able to provide it, then someone has to. And so I think that one thing that we have to challenge ourselves, as we talked about in one of our previous TED Talks about community-led planning, where there's also community-led activation and community-led activities and practices. And so, informality is just a way of saying that, here's an unidentified need, or a need that, the government might not be able to support, but we shouldn't always look to thinking about, okay, how can we get a formal organization to take on serving this need? Oftentimes, the community will say, hey, we need, like, what you're seeing in Eggleston Square, the community saw a need to kind of activate a space. And so whenever that happens, I think it's great whenever governments can get out of the way and let the people choose what they want to see in their own communities.
Good point. And I had kind of an auxiliary question to that, was when you do come up with a good idea, is the support there from your local and state government? I know, Denise, you had commented you don't feel that you have support. How about the rest of you? I know the state has doubled its investment in safer streets from $5 to $10 million. there's a lot of momentum in terms of taking advantage of the pandemic to help communities try to transform neighborhoods and make them more livable and usable. But what about that? Denise, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I do feel like we have actually gotten amazing support just in terms of like specific things that we're trying to do from the city of Boston and from Mass Development is a state agency, and our state reps have been very, very helpful. But I think it's more just speaking to what Tracy just said. I think it's just like a lag in policy keeping up, or like there isn't infrastructure, there aren't policies in place to accommodate some of this stuff that's happening. I'll just give an example. On Saturday, and also I was like trying to determine whether it was appropriate to snap when you're talking about informality, because we have a census outreach. One of our neighborhood associations, Eggleston Square Neighborhood Association, is hosting a census outreach push in a part of the neighborhood where we're struggling a lot with drug activity. It actually happens to be right next to a blue bike station. So it's like there's potential for it to be a great space that kind of meets all of these needs. And so we have a census outreach table coming there, and there's folks that we've been helping throughout the pandemic that because of immigration status have had a lot of real challenges. So we're like kind of experimenting with that informal economy thing, and invited somebody who makes tamales, like makes food from home, to come sell her tamales as part of this event. Now, maybe I shouldn't say this as part of this forum, but it's not, if it were to be permitted and we were to go through all of the appropriate channels, it would be extremely challenging to be able to, one, support this service, one, activate this space, support this kind of activity economically. So I guess how our policy is going to catch up to like what this reality is and what the fallout is from the pandemic in a way that'll support what we're all trying to do.
Okay.
I've heard of communities actually suspending permitting processes as a part of a way to kind of let communities kind of figure out their own solutions. So I want to throw that out there.
I do want to turn to at least one of the questions we had submitted to us by our audience ahead of today's event. This is a really general question, which any of you can comment on. But what are the top 3 things that Massachusetts communities can do today to begin to retrofit for 15-minute living? Any of you like to jump in on that?
Sure, if I could, Bob. I think one of the best things Massachusetts communities can do, and it kind of gets to your question earlier about the support at the state level, is the Complete Streets program has been a really incredible program, and I think a testament to what the state can accomplish with really limited resources. Because if we face the facts, unless we have a gas tax implemented, or unless we get some enhanced federal support, the state's working on limited resources, and through that program they have worked to help communities create complete streets policies internally within their operations, to create a complete streets prioritization plan that highlights the main barriers that exist in a community to create complete streets, which are really streets for all, walkable, bikeable places. And ultimately there is a grant program also associated with that. And it's very supportive. It is in some respects a drop in the bucket to the great needs that exist. A $400,000 complete streets grant will get maybe a quarter of a mile of roadway completed and sort of retrofitted to complete streets. But I think the bigger impact of that program has been to create the systems change. And I do think locally, whether it's top down, the mayor's office, our police chief, our DPW commissioner, our building commissioner, I think it has created a sense of buy-in within local government, and also a sense of shared responsibility with folks at the State House who have been amazing in supporting the city's programs, whether it's the Complete Streets program, or we have an $18 million Twin City Rail Trail that's being invested right now. And I think we have a slide for that, and we just started construction. It's a 4.5 mile trail connecting downtown Leominster and downtown Fitchburg. And so I think developing that policy and developing that systems change has really helped us think about how complete streets can permeate every aspect of what we do, where, you know, this is obviously the most clear example of complete streets, where it's an off-road path for bikes and pedestrians, but maybe less obvious when we're looking at bridges, or, you know, every road that we repave, what can we do to create a complete street environment? Or, you know, within my office, we implement the city's CDBG program, community development block grants, and we always are looking at how we can target those resources to create complete streets throughout the city, because ultimately, again, we've got to create that network, and it doesn't happen overnight. So it's really about creating that incremental growth where we can.
Okay, I do want to get to the other panelists, but we have one last poll question which we could put up. We're asking what your primary mode of travel is, and have any of the following changed since the pandemic began? So take a look at that and weigh in and let us know your responses. Okay, anyone else to comment on what communities can do today to begin retrofitting for a 15-minute living?
Bob, I want to jump in and just talk a little bit about social infrastructure, which I don't know if a lot of folks have heard about Eric Kleinenberg's book, Palaces for the People, which talks about rethinking how we use our infrastructure in our communities. And of course, this has sparked a lot of research. As a matter of fact, we're doing some research in partnership with UMass Amherst right now on social infrastructure, actually, and also with Walk Boston. And looking at, you know, the ways in which we can rethink the spaces and places, you know, already in our communities, because, you know, some of the places we think about, we don't think about them as being, you know, gathering places, but people in communities have their, you know, their favorite store that they go to and kind of hang out, and they talk to the owners, and, you know, maybe their friends also gather there. There might also be like vacant lots that people are kind of using to kind of hang out in. I think part of the ways in which we can kind of retrofit our communities to be more of a 15-minute city is to, first of all, identify and document kind of where are those natural social gathering places in our communities, and also where are there barriers to actually being able to gather. You know, I mean, no loitering signs, you know, hostile architecture. We talk about, you know, putting spikes on low walls so people can't sit and hang out. I mean, those kinds of things, you know, just kind of fixing those components is a really great way to kind of start building 15-minute cities, because if people feel comfortable walking around and hanging out, then they will be more than happy to kind of actually better activate the city, because infrastructure is intended to facilitate activity. And if your infrastructure of your city isn't facilitating activity, then do something about it. I think the other thing I'm going to ask that they kind of re-show that slide we quickly skipped over, just about the different programs that are out there. There are a lot of programs that are available, and it's been interesting to see how these programs have been implemented. I would say, you know, of all the programs that are out there, it's great that they're there. But we're finding that a lot of the focus is on economic activity on the streeteries, you know, or, you know, finding ways for people to kind of engage in monetary exchange. Number two would be to kind of think about focusing more in on public health and making sure that people have ways that they can kind of diversify kind of how they're hanging out in their communities. And so I think that those would be my top two. But I'm pretty sure some of our other panelists can pop in with numbers, I guess, 4 and 5. Yeah, so feel free to hop in.
Okay, anyone else want to comment on the things that things that communities can do now to begin to retrofit?
Bob?
Yes.
Let me speak for my profession. I think that one of the things that communities can do is start reclaiming our citizen-based right to reclaim our communities. And you know, I think that regular folk need to start talking to neighbors, talking to friends, talking to people they know about the communities where we live, and just informally start conversations. You know, many times city governments try to come up with solutions to the problems that people face every day, but many times city governments do not understand the real situations that folks live under. Unfortunately, we live in a state where there is a lot of commuting. You know, many of our city governments, most of the members of the city government do not live in the city. Yet the city employees try to come up with solutions to the problems that regular folk live in and out. And the people that know the best how to try to fix the problems that they face are the citizens themselves, the residents of the cities. So I would invite communities to just start talking to each other, you know, talk about the salons, talk about open your backyards and invite your friends and talk about problems and start looking for solutions. And you know, at the end, maybe the city councils will receive a bunch of proposals for city ordinances and so on. And I mean, what Tracy is saying, to stop the regulations, just let us try to solve our situations with our own solutions and let's see if it works. And enter into a friendly, creative dialogue where, you know, and we're trying this in Fitchburg with Tom, we're trying to implement this down up, bottom down partnership where we can find those conversations. But I think that everything starts with the neighbors talking to neighbors and finding solutions to our own problems.
I think you're right. Sometimes you really have to listen to the people because they're the quote experts when it comes to what they need. The results of our final poll question: what is your primary mode of travel? 32% of you said walking, 6% biking, 52% said car, 3% bus, and 6% train. So a lot of car drivers still out there. And have any of the following changed since the pandemic began? Your primary mode of travel, 29% said yes. Where you travel, 68% said yes, which may reflect about more kind of localized travel that we were talking about. How far you travel has also changed. By 58% of you say that, and 65% say how frequently I travel. I'm not sure if that's more or less, but certainly a change. Lots of change in travel patterns there that people are responding to. Anyone else care to comment on some really good thoughts there about what we can do to get the process going in our cities in terms of trying to make them more accessible and easy for people? I would just like to throw out one thing, because I just finished a piece on regional transit authorities. And like a lot of transit agencies, they've really been upended by the pandemic. And they're trying to figure out how to come back and really be able to better serve their communities. And they're relooking at a lot of the fixed route service they have to find out if that's really what is working. How do any of you feel about what your RTAs, or other than walking and biking, what kind of transit services could be provided to make things better in your communities?
So, you know, I think our regional transit system in Fitchburg and in North Central, we're doing great work with extremely limited resources. And, you know, just recently we got a $5 million grant from the FTA and CARES Act funding to actually implement a free fare system, which just ended this last month, which I think was great because it started to reframe public transit not as a revenue generating operation, but really as a public good. But unfortunately, you know, given the funding circumstances, it was a Band-Aid solution. And I think our RTAs are doing the best they can with limited resources. But I think the more we can invest in them, the easier we'll be able to develop those 15-minute cities, because even the neighborhoods in and around the commuter rail system, that last mile of travel from commuter rail to your home is really difficult without a regular, you know, well-functioning RTA system that's well-funded. And I do think that's something we need to advocate for, and completely echo Francisco's sentiments. You know, we're building all this infrastructure. That's great, but if people aren't using it, and if people aren't advocating to build more and to extend those networks, we can't just expect, and if you build it, they will come mentality. So I think getting those systems in place and building power from the ground level to advocate to enhance and improve those systems is absolutely critical.
Denise, you made a comment about a former T-stop at Eggleston Square. So there is no T service now, or what do you need in your neighborhood?
No, it was formerly the site of like an elevated when there was the elevated Orange Line, which is no longer there. So it's not. We have the Orange Line runs. We have 5 minutes from us. There's there's the Stony Brook T stop and the Jackson Square T stop. So we are actually well served by transit. I think. There's some challenges around bus service, and we're getting. I was just typing an answer, which maybe I'll use this opportunity to say it live, but there's a question about real complete streets. So there's a center bus lane being constructed along Columbus Avenue that's going to go right through Eggleston. So this is something that's on our mind a lot. It's going to bring much needed transit improvements, pedestrian safety improvements. There's two biggest bus stops along that line served a building where there's a lot of folks who are elderly and disabled. So the previous bus stop was like pretty treacherous and uncomfortable. And, there's a library right nearby where there was some pedestrian incidents or accidents. So this is much needed, but at the same time, businesses are very concerned about this parking issue again. So can we look at underutilized, there's a lot of underutilized space that could be used for parking. I mean, I think the whole discussion about moving away from, completely valid to move away from car travel, but at the same time acknowledging that that's a real need, and how do we find creative solutions to support it.
Yeah, lots of our respondents to that last poll said they're still driving or using their cars. Ame, I see that you wanted to comment. You may have the last go at it here. Go ahead.
Oh, goodness. I was a little sad to see how low the percentage for transit was, so 3% and 6%. Like, that just kind of broke my heart, because I'm a transit advocate. But I think this idea, and I think Tom was referring to it, is if you really want to have a 15-minute neighborhood, you're going to need transit to make those connections between those different neighborhoods. And so transit is the kind of fundamental backbone of the 15-minute neighborhood and the linkages to creating a more accessible city. So that's all I wanted to say.
All right. Well, I think we're just about at the end of our program here. I want to thank everybody who has participated. What makes these programs, I think, so crucial right now is the pandemic itself. We're having an opportunity to look again at our infrastructure in our cities and towns, our transit services, our neighborhoods, the fact that we don't have to drive everywhere as much as we used to, I think, is changing everything as well. So I think it's a great time to be talking about this and to move ahead with changes. And that's why I asked about, if you're getting government support. But I think, Francisco, your point is really well taken. The government sometimes doesn't listen to the people before it acts, or a lot of people think they know what's best for the neighborhoods, when in fact the people who live there are the ones who should be talked to first. So thank you very much for that. But I want to thank you all for being with us this morning, and everybody who joined us online. This is one in a series of transit-oriented development talks. We call them TOD Talks, thanks to Tracy Corley, and we'll be having another one, I believe, next month. Please take our survey, sign up for the Mass Inc. Challenge, and also we will talk to you about our next program.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.